Welcome back to the Enchanted Fibres podcast. This is episode 11, and in today's episode, I'm going to be going into knit projects, but also sewing projects. So I will put the timestamp in the video of where sewing starts if that's what you're interested in, and otherwise, I'll have bookmarks on the video so that you can hop around if you don't care about knitting or vice versa. So I don't have a lot of finished objects today, but I'm essentially going to talk about finished objects, work in progresses, and some upcoming thoughts about next projects. That's my plan. So to start with finished objects, so I technically do have some finished sewing objects, but I only have one knitting one. And my finished object in terms of knitting is the Boulevard bag by Lily Kate France, or Lily Kate Makes on YouTube. For this project, I used some yarn leftovers. So the body of the yarn, or the body of the bag, is Wool and the Gang Alpacino Merino, and the channels are knit with Merino 1 by Wool and the Gang. I think the 1 Merino. It's a really weird name in my opinion, but both of these were gifted yarns, and I did use Alpacino Merino for a sweater that was designed by Wool and the Gang, and then I had some leftovers, actually a lot left over. And yeah, I just thought it would be the perfect yarn to use. So without further ado, I am using a mic. You can probably tell. I find if I clip it, you can't really hear me, so that's kind of silly. So I'm holding it. It's going to be hard to hold up objects at the same time. I might just drop the mic and rely on my phone mic for when I'm talking about objects. So since my last video, I finished knitting the second panel, and then from there, you essentially seam it together through a sequence of events, and you add in the zipper as well. So that was fine. It definitely, I think what I ended up doing was I added the zip ties before I added the zipper, and the zip ties are what give the channels structure. Now, with my zip ties, I disregarded her recommendation because I already had zip ties on hand and they were a bit shorter than hers. So for my second bag, I would definitely just purchase longer zip ties. I don't think they're that expensive. Just so that the finished object has even more structure. Like, essentially because they're short, they kind of poke out of some of the channels, and that's just not ideal. So, you know, it just doesn't have the same quality as it could have if I had used bigger zip ties, is what I'm thinking. Ultimately, I think it's a super cute bag, and I will 100% see if I use it in the winter. I'm kind of curious because ultimately it has more of a winter vibe or maybe fall vibe to me. So I'm really curious to see if I reach out to it in those seasons, because in terms of the summer, I have not been drawn to it at all. I don't really feel like it goes with any of my outfits yet. So that's kind of where I'm at. I definitely would knit this again. It uses barely any yarn, and I highly recommend it just as a stash busting project. In case anyone is curious, it's knit on 4mm needles. I'll have a link to the Ravelry page down below. So if you're looking to get more information, there will be plenty of information there. Just because I've talked about it in my last podcast, I want to try to keep this one on the shorter side. That's actually it for my finished objects. And now we're going to get into whips. The first one I'd like to talk about today is the balloon cardigan by PetiteKnit, and I am making good headway since my last podcast. I'm knitting the size extra small, but with gauge modifications, and I definitely was on Raglan Island in the last video, but that was a bit ago. So I'm almost done the body. I did endeavor to try to finish it for the video today, but it was not realistic. Just because I'm having some like pinched nerve issues with my wrist, and that has been limiting my knitting time, which also correlates to why I've been sewing more. At this point, I literally have probably 2 or 3 rows of ribbing left, and then I'm going to be doing a tubular bind off. I think that's as per the pattern, to get a really clean finish on the bottom of the body of the cardigan. Ultimately, this cardigan is super cute. and I think I'll definitely make more in the future. I feel like cardigans, there's just a lot of back and forth going on, and I am kind of getting an urge to do more of a sweater type project. The balloon cardigan is knit on 4mm needles, and I'm using right now the Rosario Spore Aurora yarn in colorway 44, and the other one is the Retrosaria Rosa Pomar Coast in colorway 121. Put together, they just make, I think, what will be a really cute pink for my skin tone. I'll let you know. So when I was knitting the body for the balloon cardigan, I felt like I was losing interest because it's just back and forth, knit, purl, and there's not a lot of exciting things going on. So I decided I wanted a quick, kind of almost like bulky weight project, something that would help me get through my stash a bit better. So I decided to look at my queue and just see what sort of quicker, heavier weight projects were in there. And I decided on the Bowtie tank by Park Williams. So the pattern calls for a DK weight yarn, although because I'm trying to go through kind of random yarn in my stash, I am substituting a yarn. It's actually technically a bulky weight, but when I looked at it, I knew that it should meet gauge, and I did a gauge swatch, and it did. The yarn I'm using is the Karen X Pantone yarn. It's a 60% acrylic, 20% merino, and 20% nylon blend. And the colorway is coconut cream. Ultimately, so far my thoughts are the pattern is super easy, super beginner friendly, and I am making some modifications just so that I know I will hopefully wear it. And also just knowing that I'm substituting a heavier yarn. For example, I decided I don't want to knit the actual bow ties, which is funny because it's called the bow tie tank. I'm just gonna knit straps, like a typical tank top, so that hopefully I can actually wear it to work and wear a blazer over top of it and it won't have like a weird bump going on. And then the other modification I'm doing is knitting it longer. I'm almost knitting it just past my belly button. Instead of doing what she has you do at the top, which is like folding over a stockinette, almost like a double knit look, but not quite. I'm doing a 1x1 rib so that hopefully it'll cinch in and just provide some shape. I can't really put words on it, but I just have a funny feeling that I'm going to want 1x1 ribbing, and I'm following my gut in terms of how I execute this project. So some stats about the project, it's knit on 4.5mm needles for the body and 3.75mm for the edging. The size range is XXS to 5XL, and this fits a 24 to 60 inch bust. Now, technically, this is including the 4 to 8 inch negative ease recommendation. I couldn't even tell you what my negative ease is. I don't know if I actually selected it or if I'm just following the pattern. I'm not modifying anything other than, of course, the straps and the bottom of the tank. My next work in progress is the Stella top by Svetlana Volkova. And this is something I know a few knitters have spoken about, especially Future Fiber comes to mind, and there might be some others. But this is one I've had my eyes on for quite some time. I've even had the yarn I want to use picked out for quite some time. And I finally, once again, in that stash busting mentality, decided to start it. Now, as mentioned, my wrists have not been great. It's not even just because of knitting, it's just because of working, and I also do Ninja Warrior. I did start this project knowing it might be a bit hard on my hands because I'm using 100% cotton. I'm using the Rowan cotton glace. I might be saying that wrong. It's essentially just 100% cotton and very sturdy, structured, kind of like scratchy. But that being said, I think it'll be really nice to wear and also super durable. I am a little bit worried about it stretching out over time with repeated wear and then just being too big because it doesn't have any spring to it. It's not springy at all. But regardless, the top is actually a sport weight top, and the size range is 2XS to 4XL, and the bust that fits, and this is including the negative ease, which is 2 to 8 inches, is 22.5 to 58.5 inches. And it does call for a range of 500 to 1400 yards. I think I will just fit within that range. or that's the goal. So when I started this project, I initially thought maybe I could get away with using needles I already have, and I tried swatching on 3mm needles, and that was way too big. So I ended up buying needles from Collage, and I talked about this in my last video, so I won't worry about it now. So the next thing is the pattern recommends 2.75mm needles. I swatched again with the recommended needles, and once again, it just wasn't meeting gauge. And I know why. I know it's because this yarn has literally no bounce to it. So the ribbing was not bouncing into itself, if that makes sense. And I think that's why my swatch was still too big. So I am actually using 2.25mm needles for a sport weight yarn. And it's very hard on my hands. I am going to do it, especially when my wrists get better. It's doable. As you can see in my B-roll, I'm making progress. I'm not making progress. It's something that it's pretty easy to pick up and just know where I left off because I just follow the stitches and it's in the round and it's just the same thing over and over and over again. With that being said, it's a little mundane and it's really hard on my hands. So I'm just making really slow progress and that's okay. I just don't think I'm going to get around to knitting as many summer projects as I hoped because my wrist discomfort is lingering a lot longer than I expected. And I have this rule of only having 3 projects on at a time. I think otherwise I'll get mentally overwhelmed, and that seems to be a magical number for me. I can have like a fingering weight potentially or a DK weight in a bulky project, and I can always bounce between them depending on how my hands are feeling, how my brain is feeling, how my mind is feeling. But yeah, I can always easily bounce between them and I feel like I can get satisfied no matter what. If you watched my last video, which was 20 plus underrated patterns, then you probably know I'm itching to do something with cables. So I'm really excited. I might even cast on a 4th project and break my own rule because I am so excited for cables. And for now, I'm trying to get my balloon cardigan done so that hopefully I can move on to something else. The bow tie tank, and then I can essentially, yeah, I can move on to 2 projects if I get those 2 done. I'm definitely close to the finish line for those. So, in case you're wondering what's next for my knitting, there is one sweater I spoke about in my last video, and it's the Sweater Rose by Mochi Knits. I have been thinking about a project like this for quite some time. I think I mentioned that in that video as well. I already have a yarn picked out and I will share that with you right now. So this is not the recommended yarn, but I know I can swap it out and I know I can make it work. And I'm planning on making it in this beautiful, bright, let me see if I can get it to focus. This beautiful bright green yarn, it's actually a little bit duller on camera, but I might see if I can fix that in some post-production magic. The yarn is the Bamboo Twist 8-ply by Bendigo Wool and Knit. The yarn is the Bamboo Twist 8-ply by Bendigo Wool and Mills, and it's a bamboo wool mix. The colorway, in case you're curious, is 2558 Conifer. The other idea I've been really drawn to is making a almost like creamy cardigan, and something like the champagne cardigan would be good, but I've also been really eyeing the Paul cardigan by Moreka Knits, and I'm also going to revisit the video I just shared and see if there's anything that speaks to me there, but I think just knowing the style I have in mind, which is like a super, not a statement piece, but a basic that I can hopefully have for the rest of my life. I might have to go with something more understated and simple is kind of what I'm thinking. I will put on screen which yarn I'm thinking about using because I brought down something, but I might tweak it a little bit. It's ultimately something I've spoken about in my last podcast in the acquisition section, but either way, I'll have some B-roll and I'll show you what combination I'm thinking of for that project. Another thing that I've been really drawn to, partially because of the yarn I want to use and I really enjoyed working with it. And secondly, I think it'll be quick. And thirdly, I think it's beautiful and would work so well in like the fall and the spring and the winter and also potentially for workwear is the Giverny blouse by Knits from Oslo. And the yarn I'm really leaning towards using is the Wonder Fluff, and I'll see I used it recently to make a cardigan that I love wearing. It's so comfortable on my skin. It was a pleasure to work with, and I feel like I could get into that. And that's it for the knitting section, so let's get into the sewing section. So, with being restricted with knitting for quite a while, I decided, especially with the summer, it's a good time to get into sewing. It has been something on my mind for a while. I remember seeing I remember seeing High Fiber Knits sewing and several other podcasters that I watched, and I was feeling that urge to like get into it, but I wasn't motivated yet enough to start. And then I think with my wrist pain and needing a creative hobby to put my energy into, it was the perfect time. So I started with going to Fabricland and picking out some beautiful fabrics that spoke to me in bright colors that spoke to me and that I feel like really suit me in general. And I don't have them where I'm sitting right now, but I will have some B-roll, I think, of these fabrics. Now, technically, I did sew when I was younger, so I do have this previous experience in the back of my mind of what to do and how to do it, and almost like an internal confidence about it. That being said, I knew it had been a while, and I decided I wanted to do some practice projects with material I don't really care about. So my husband is a dental hygienist and he has some scrubs that he never wore. So they are in a scrubby material, like uh they're a bit more structured, I guess, and they're definitely a wrinkle proof almost material, I would say. So they're a bit weird, but you know what? I was practicing. So I found I have one top that I like, so I decided I'd try to remake that as a practice project, and I took a very much a self-drafting approach. I didn't try to find any related or similar patterns. I think I have an internal instinct of some kind when it comes to how things go together. And I definitely think knitting more complicated things has helped me grow that as well, including my understanding of fabric and what is nice and what is not nice. And you kind of go through a journey like that when you start knitting. So it's kind of cool that I've been able to apply it to sewing. Anywho, I'll put pictures of those two things on screen. The other one I think was I was watching a reel and I saw a girl wearing a shirt. So vague. I saw a girl wearing a shirt and I just took a screenshot and I'm like, I'm gonna see if I can make that. That's really cool. So I will say I didn't do a bad job. I took some inspiration from Lily Kate France and the Boulevard bag and I used zip ties to give the top structure. So I'll definitely, as I mentioned, I will put a picture on screen. I'm not going to bother modeling it right now, but I definitely think I could see myself wearing it out. I just think it would be a really weird top to pack, so I would have to be going out in town ideally to wear this one. So, with my practice projects out of the way, I decided I was ready to start. And I'm going to put the name of the pattern on screen because I meant to get it before the video and I forgot. The first pattern I decided to make, and honestly, in hindsight, I didn't know that I was using a slightly more complicated material, but I went with the flow. And the material I was using was a cotton nylon. So it had a bit of stretch to it, and this made it a lot harder to work with. I was trying to use cotton thread that I had on hand, and fortunately, I had to go to Value Village because I ran out of it. And the lady essentially recommended that I use a polyester thread. So that was a lesson learned. She pretty much said, if you're working with something that's got like a artificial component, whether it's polyester or nylon or something like that, you're better off using a polyester thread. And if you have a cotton or linen, you're better off using a cotton thread. So that was one of my first times ever learning that, to be honest with all of you. Overall, the project was smooth, but it did take quite some time because it's tiered and it's gathered. So there's a lot of material going into this, a lot of basting, a lot of gathering, a lot of sewing, a lot of like finishing, just a lot. And very worth it. I'm so happy with how it turned out. I think other than having a better idea of how to do the zigzag stitch to get a nicer look, And other than the fact that I think I might have a leather working sewing needle in my sewing machine, which essentially means that when I basted with it, it left like holes, and that might be the material I chose as well. But essentially, it left some holes, uh, which you would only see if you looked up close to where the tiers are. Overall, though, the drape is amazing. The skirt is stunning. I'm so happy with it. I'm really proud of it, and I also feel like you can't tell that I made it unless you look really close. For this pattern, I sewed the size 12. I'm not sure if that matters, but it fits great. What else is also really cool about this pattern is that it's in general a style and design that I love. I've been drawn to this type of style of clothing forever. I know I'll make it over and over and over again in different materials and colors, and it's just something that I'll constantly get value from. So one thing I really tried to do before getting further into sewing was watching a lot of sewing podcasts. Someone I really like watching is Kate Makes. She talks a lot about her lessons learned. She has a really beautiful aesthetic. She makes really beautiful objects, and I've just been watching a lot of her. So essentially, through watching her videos and other videos, I've learned it's a really good idea to prototype things that you're not familiar with, especially because you want to make sure if you make mistakes, you're making mistakes on a cheaper fabric and not the nice, fancy, expensive fabric that you bought. Which I will say, I invested into my fabrics and I really don't want to mess them up. This next pattern, I essentially looked at several options that were all similar. It was really hard to know which one was the right call and which one would fit me the best. But I came across, and I can't think of her name, so I'll put it on screen. And she knit the style of pant that I was looking for, like a wide leg, high waisted waistband, and just like something I love to wear because it's kind of like wearing, yeah, it's kind of like wearing PJs, so it's really comfortable to work from home in, but then you also still feel put together. So she really highly recommended this pattern, and it was perfect. It made my decision easy, and I do not regret it one little bit. The name of the pattern is a little bit unclear, but I believe it's the Palazzo Peter wide leg pants is a good way to put it. And I did fully sew a prototype first. So I went to Value Village and I looked at the bed sheets and I picked out 3 sheets. They're all 100% cotton. They all were in colors I thought I could wear, and they were all good prices. I think I spent $14 on them, and I still have, out of the two things, actually, so the pants, I still have material left. I still have enough to definitely make a pair of shorts, if not another pair of pants. And I think it was a queen sheet. So highly recommend that. I definitely have heard this as a common thing on several sewing podcasts and such. So I just copied them, and I'm glad that they had some nice cottons in stock that were nice colors, and I really honestly love the idea of doing it. So we'll see how that impacts my material choices in the future. Although I still think there's something to be said about fresh material that hasn't been used before. I'm really happy I decided to prototype these pants because I had a little bit of a lazy moment, and I should know better because I am a knitter, and if you have a lazy moment when you're knitting, it always ends up biting you in the butt. At least the silver lining is at least sewing is a little bit less time consuming, or at least sewing these pants was a little bit less time consuming than the tiered skirt, for example, which took a lot longer. I was too lazy to figure out how to find the grain in the fabric, and I essentially, as a result, tried to guess and ended up cutting against the grain, which, because it's a prototype, I will forgive myself. But now that I know how to find the grain, I really regret not spending 2 seconds to figure it out. And that was a lesson learned, and I will never make that mistake again with a sheet, ever again. Ultimately, it was too late. The good news is I at least cut against the grain for every piece. But the bad news is the drape is impacted by it, and I will show you in B-roll, but just the way it stretches out is just not the right way. And it could also be because of the way I pinned it. Maybe I didn't pin it fully straight and ultimately sewed it in now almost like a diagonal angle. Despite this mistake, I think I might still wear them, but I would have to wear them on a, yeah, in an evening when it's darker, or potentially when I'm working from home and nobody can see my pants anyways, so I can still like get use out of them, but maybe not wear them on a nice night out. Another lesson I learned with this was the buttonhole, the buttonhole foot on my machine. I did try looking up tutorials to make sure I used it right. And on my machine, it has a 0 and a 1, and then in between the 0 and the 1, there's a buttonhole image. So I didn't know exactly. So I just put it close to 0. I didn't quite put it at 0, put it close to 0, and I did this on my prototyping waistband, and I was too lazy to cut out a new waistband. So Um, either way, I essentially it kept stalling. So it kept buttonholing in the same spot and it wasn't moving. And I was getting really frustrated. I'm like, why is this not working? And eventually I found a video that's a bit older, like 12 years old or something, that said it can't be on 0. If you put it on 0, it's just not going to do anything. So I moved it to 1 and magically it was working. The purpose of doing the buttonholes was actually for the drawstring. So you're essentially making eyelet holes that the drawstring will go through and then you can tie it. And because I knew it was a prototype and because I have sweatpants that are also like this, I ended up just making it so the drawstring holes are on the inside. And I decided because they fit okay without a drawstring, not to add a drawstring. So I've just kind of hidden on the inside my messed up buttonholes and it works. You know, I just don't have drawstrings in them. If they ever do eventually stretch out and I do feel like wearing them in public or something, I will cut out a drawstring and sew it and then insert it into the waistband. But for now, I'm not worrying about that. One other small thing with these is the waistband for me is a bit tight. I have two theories. I think the elastic I've used is not that stretchy, so a little bit less forgiving. I also think that when I pinned the waistband to the pants, I know I did this. I like had some excess material and I just folded it under and like turned it into a pleat. Big regret because I actually think I could have used that 1 inch for fitting. So essentially it just fits, like if I'm pulling them up, they just fit over my butt. So I can do it, but I feel like I'm on the verge of breaking them every time. So either I need to shrink my butt or not make that mistake again. These pants are exactly what I'm looking for, and also you get two styles. So you get a wide leg and a straight, almost like more of a straight leg version. So the one I used was the straighter leg, and I love it, but it also means I know I'll love the wide leg. That's it for my finished sewing objects, and next is a work in progress called the Cozette dress by Allis Patterns. I am sewing the size small. And actually, fortuitously, my bust and waist measurements matched exactly the chart. So I am hoping that it just fits perfectly and I don't have to alter anything. This all being said, I am prototyping this 100% and I even checked the grain line so that I'm with the grain and I'm not messing that up. So hopefully this is a prototype, but hopefully I can also wear the prototype. That's the goal. And then I'll knit it with this beautiful floral fabric that I've picked out. And I'll show that in either B-roll or I'll show that in my next video. Now, I am working on a vlog style video of me making the dress. So I'm really excited about posting that type of content and seeing how, I guess seeing how it comes together and seeing if I can do it. Like successfully, like remember to film and remember to look presentable and get good lighting. It's kind of like a fun challenge for me. As of right now, all that I've done is cut out the pieces and I'm at the verge of starting sewing, maybe even after this video. So after this prototype is done, I'm not quite sure if I'll sew the dress or the pants or start something new. I did buy one extra pattern that I knew for sure I wanted to use, and I'm going to be using the leftover fabric, which I have a good amount left from the tiered skirt that I made. And I'm going to be making the ruched front top by Sewingmachina. I won't talk too much about this one, but I think it'll be super cute, especially with the fabric I have in mind. I think they will go hand in hand together really nicely. And I've actually printed all the pages And that is everything for today's podcast number 11. Thank you so much for coming by. And if you're still here, thanks so much for watching till the end. Please give me a thumbs up if you did like it, and also subscribe because, why not? It's just one click. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.
Bye.